Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of July Savings Month. July is always an important month because it's a time when we can reflect on how we have been saving as a country and also how we've been saving as individuals. And this year, it's particularly pertinent that we talk about saving because of the COVID-19 global pandemic. Welcome to Ways to Save. Ways to Save is an initiative of the South African Savings Institute in partnership with Absa Bank. And July Savings Month in South Africa is a time when we are going to discuss the challenges that 2020 is bringing us with regards to our finances. We could all use with a boost to our savings. And thanks to our sponsor, Absa, you might be lucky. 4 lucky winners or 4 lucky members of this particular webinar will be walking off with 1,000 Rand on a computer selected random draw. And if you participate on all our webinar series, you could be the lucky winner of 10,000 Rand in a tax-free savings account. My name is Gerald Mwandiambira. I'm the acting CEO of the South African Okay, it's a webinar, relax. I'm the acting CEO of the South African Savings Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to this first launch webinar. Before we go into the proceedings, we'd like to formally welcome you as a Savings Institute. And to do that, we've got our chairperson, Ms. Prem Govender, who is going to just welcome us all. A professional accountant in private practice and a CFP professional, Prem is passionate about encouraging people to adopt good money habits and embrace the culture of saving. To this end, she chairs the board of the South African Savings Institute and is a trustee of the Financial Services Consumer Education Foundation, set up by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. Both organizations are dedicated to promoting financial literacy and encouraging saving and debt management among South African consumers. Prem previously served as a member of both the FSB's long-term insurance and phase advisory committees. Prem is also the godmother or the mother of SASI, and as long as I've been at SASI, she's been at the helm. And I'd like to welcome you, Prem, and please welcome our audience.
Thank you, Gerald. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the South African Savings Institute, popularly known as SASI, a very warm welcome to the launch of National Savings Month 2020. As Gerald mentioned, July is traditionally Savings Month, and we at SASI, we're not going to allow COVID-19 or the lockdown to stop us from observing this important month. Face-to-face interventions being impossible right now, we took the decision to embrace technology and spread the savings message nonetheless. And judging from how many of you have joined us tonight, it does indicate great interest in learning more about one's finances. So in keeping with the plight we all find ourselves in, this year will be far more than just highlighting how important savings and debt management is. The pandemic has affected every one of us in different ways. However, the impact on our finances has to be the single biggest blow that's been dealt us. This is why our chosen theme is Ways to Save, building financial resilience in uncertain times, and indeed, these are uncertain times. To do this, we have lined up some really great experts in the financial arena who will, among other things, guide you on how to rebuild your finances with practical tools and hints and tips on taking back control of your financial health and well-being. I don't want to dwell on statistics and debt ratios tonight and how we are still a nation of mostly non-savers. But suffice to say that our finances were not exactly in the best shape before the lockdown. However, right now, it is what it is, and we need to take a long, hard look at where we are and what we can do to rebuild our fragile financial situation. Today, our experts will begin this journey with you, explaining further in the series of webinars we have planned for the rest of the month. It is our fervent wish that you will register for all of the webinars, encourage others to do so as well, so that as many people as possible will benefit from what our experts espouse. We are also excited about the competition that will be run during this month, and as Gerald mentioned, cash prizes which we could all do with. Let me point out, though, that none of this would have been possible without the generosity of our sponsor. Absa Bank have once again joined forces with SASI to make Savings Month possible, for which we are extremely grateful. Mr. Tamit Sele and your team, a huge thank you for your overwhelming support and sponsorship for the third year running. You have once again stepped forward, and I can truly say that this is the best thing you can do for South Africans right now, especially during the trying times that we all find ourselves in. Sir, we salute you and Absa Bank. Thank you. With these words then, on behalf of SASI, I hereby formally launch National Savings Month, and I hope that the lessons learned from today and the weekly webinars we have planned will truly put you on the path to financial recovery and ultimately financial freedom.
Thank you, Prem, for your kind words, and thank you for officially launching the July Savings Month. Now, I'm amongst our audience, there might be a few people who've never heard of SASI and just clicked out of interest, and maybe it's your first time encountering the Savings Institute. The South African Savings Institute is a non-profit entity which was founded in 2001, and we have three particular objectives. The first one is advocacy. We talk on behalf of the consumers to various stakeholders, including the Banking Association, government, National Treasury, and we represent a voice for consumers. So that's one pillar. Another pillar of SASI is research, an area we'd love to continue to participate in, where we'd like to be able to run academic papers and hold a research library specifically around savings and investment in South Africa. And the third pillar of the SASI is the consumer education work that we do. And we run a number of campaigns, of which the July Savings Month is one of them. And July Savings Month would certainly not be possible without the generous sponsorship of Absa Bank, who have been our partners and continue to support the work of SASI. On behalf of Absa, we're going to have Dr. Leseko Rametsi, who's a qualified medical doctor and a UCT MBA graduate, and she's currently Group Head of Wellness for Absa. She has extensive experience in occupational health, workplace wellness programs, health risk management, comprehensive health strategy, and sustainable development. Her role entails managing the holistic well-being of Absa employees, including physical, psychological, and of course, financial wellness. She's here to give the address on behalf of our sponsors this evening, and you can also catch her as one of the participants in the Ways to Save webinars with Dr. Cindy Van Zyl on 1 August. Dr. Leseko, welcome. I think you need to unmute here.
Thank you very much, Gerald. Yeah, the elusive unmute button was evading me there. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. COVID-19 is unprecedented, and we realize that this is an extremely difficult time for many South Africans whose livelihoods are impacted by the national lockdown and restrictions in economic activities. As we embrace National Savings Month, it is crucial that we help people to manage both health and the financial crisis. Looking at consumers' financial wellness holistically is absolutely vital. To this end, we've acknowledged that our customers have a continuum of banking needs and expectations as opposed to linear and transactional approaches. Such a realization has allowed us to become more savings relevant as we lower the proximity between the customers and the bank. In fact, our mantra is about seeing a customer in their completeness, and we believe in the uniqueness of our value proposition as a bank. One of our commitments in this regard is financial inclusion, which includes financial literacy training. This is why we went into partnership with the South African Savings Institute. They are also tireless in encouraging South Africans to recognize the importance of saving and to save. National Savings Month is one of the headline events on the South African fiscal calendar, rivaled by very few initiatives. Having a month where people and entities from all walks of life come together under the banner of getting people to save, it's something that we really believe in. And we believe that it's something that's incredible. This year, given the challenges we face as a nation, the importance of Savings Month has been amplified beyond expectation. As a proud supporter of SASI, this annual launch is the convergence of key industry stakeholders, consumer media, business, and clients, as we seek to reflect on the state of savings and the actions required to get South Africans thinking about savings. It fills me with immense pride to have so many of our closest stakeholders, captains of industry, and colleagues here tonight. The chance to pause for a moment to reconnect and reaffirm our commitment to savings is pivotal as we seek to foster stronger working relations going forward. Banks have both at an individual level and as an industry made resolute efforts to alleviate some of these pressures. From an Absa perspective, we believe in the strategic role we play in shaping society. Now more than ever, we have accentuated our efforts in this regard. We support government's efforts to mitigate the impact of COVID-19, but we also recognize that these vital steps have a profound financial impact on many South Africans. With the economy under severe pressure and customers across the spectrum impacted, it is imperative that banks do everything in their power to service customers in a responsible and sustainable way, and our collective futures depend on this. While the COVID-19 pandemic has placed us all under severe pressure, it has spawned greater clarity of thought and improved focus on customers and appreciation for the power of collaboration. Ultimately, the meaningful cushioning of customers will flow from the collective industry efforts to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 as it has the necessary scale and reach to assist South Africans in need. From an Absa point of view, our payment relief program allows customers to defer payments on all major credit products for a period of 3 months. Since the launch of this program, almost 731,000 account holders have benefited from the relief, which amounts to 8.95 billion rands cash flow relief over the 3-month period across our retail and business bank. The initiative covers all customers from retail to business, and it has no turnover limits or income thresholds. And I think understanding this in the context of Saving Month will be vital in unlocking greater financial freedom for the nation. It is thus an honor and a privilege for Absa to be associated with National Savings Month in partnership with the South African Saving Institute, because as an organization, we believe that a saving nation will lead to prosperity. Given these unprecedented times and uncertain times, many of us are wondering, how do I even start to think about saving when I'm worried about survival? My spouse has lost his job. My partner's gym is not operational. I think my company will retrench workers. Thus, I'm worried about job security. And this is our reality. Please join the various ways to save webinars planned during the Savings Month to take stock of where you're at, to reset, empower yourself, and take charge of your finances. It's never too late. Looking at the lineup, my fellow panelists, I can assure you, you are in for a treat. COVID-19 has been an attack on everyone's physical and mental well-being. If I had asked you before the pandemic if you're healthy, if you've had enough savings and retirement, you would likely have answered in the affirmative. If I had asked if you could live off 1 month's salary, or without an income for a period, it would have been unlikely, but you'd be able to manage, maybe with the support of a family member or a partner. Now the situation is different, and for some it is quite dire. COVID-19 has accentuated the great economic divide and has also revealed that despite what is known, not everyone has a 6-month cash buffer to withstand an economic crisis like the one we are faced with. It has devastated lives and livelihoods and shown that no one is immune and no one is as healthy as they seem. The pandemic has also reminded us about the fragility of our health and financial ecosystems. As we reset for the future, it is imperative that we do more to insulate ourselves. As we deal with this pandemic that is COVID-19 and its profound health, social, and financial consequences, it is clear that our financial, mental, emotional, and physical well-being are intimately intertwined. According to the latest survey by the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, 55% of the South African population is experiencing high levels of anxiety. 46% are in financial stress or are experiencing financial pressure of some sort. 40% have clinical depression, and 12% have feelings of suicide. These numbers have increased quite significantly during the lockdown as compared to the same period last year. While there are various contributing factors to stress, we know that financial and economic worries constitute a big part of this. This includes concerns about mounting debt, school fees, and worries about pending changes in personal or work circumstances, and they may have an adverse impact on your income, and yes, even concerns about not having enough to survive. Our physical health indicators as a nation are also of concern. 40% of South Africans are overweight, 27% of men and 26% of women have high blood pressure, and 13% have diabetes. The high burden of disease has an impact on the ability to be economically active, and it costs the South African economy billions of rands annually. And this pandemic has also highlighted the importance of our health as we're seeing adverse outcomes in COVID-related morbidity and mortality in persons with these chronic diseases of lifestyle. What we do know is that ongoing stress is linked to other health challenges like heart disease, alcohol abuse, anxiety, depression, suicide. And also, we do know that depression, anxiety, and alcohol abuse has a strong link with the pandemic that South Africa continues to grapple with, the pandemic of gender-based violence and femicide. These problems manifest into a vicious cycle, which impacts on the physical, emotional, psychological, and financial well-being. As we battle this pandemic, it is important that we do not lose sight of these other epidemics that have an ability to become pandemics in the near future. For us to succeed, we require comprehensive and collaborative programs that incorporate behavioral economics to support consumers and customers in realizing true health, wealth, and well-being. The time has come for us to go back to basics, to reclaim our health and well-being, and build a solid foundation towards attaining true wealth. As with COVID-19, overcoming financial challenges requires us to go back to basics. Think of saving as washing your hands, because washing our hands is an absolute necessity. Think of hand sanitizing as putting aside any amount of money until you can put more in. Think of social distancing as avoiding emotional purchases and staying away from offers that seem too good to be true, because truly, they probably are too good to be true. Think of thermal scanning as looking at your budget, where you are overspending, where you should be concerned, what to cut back on. And these are really important things that we have to start considering. Over the next month, please tune in so that you can get tips on how you can attain some of these saving hacks. Lastly, get help. The same way a positive diagnosis of COVID-19 would require you to get medical help, it's important that you get help if you find yourself in a financial difficult situation. Help is always available. To end off, I would like to quote Martin Luther King Jr. saying, "Only in darkness can you see the stars." As we navigate these trying times, let us use this opportunity to learn anew, to set ourselves on the path of true prosperity. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we're really looking forward to your participation in the webinars during this month. Thank you. Back to you, Gerald. Just a second.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lesego. And we'll be hearing a little bit more from Dr. Lesego a little bit later on our webinar today. Now, we're all at home, right? And we're all relaxed. So I think I'm going to relax as well. Take off my beautiful red tie. Yeah, now I'm more relaxed. Yes, yes. That feels much better. Now, you're also in your homes, and we thank you for joining us. And by joining us, I'd like us to believe that we're now all family. We're all in each other's home. And as some of our speakers participate, please don't be surprised if you see the odd child or cat or dog joining us in our webinar. This is the reality of where we are right now. Now, we're going to go into the crux of why we're here today. Each of our speakers and specialists is going to introduce their topic and start talking about what they will be doing in terms of sharing information. Now, part of information sharing is questions, and we welcome as many questions as you want to send in from anyone who's in this particular webinar. Your question might be addressed today or will be addressed in any of the future webinars. And I'd like to thank Yolanda, Rosemary, Morianne, Lebo, Mapula, Lindy, Vuyo, and Monica for already sending in their questions. And your questions will definitely be looked at by each of our panelists, and we'll start to address, hopefully, some of your concerns. Now, tauda kuti taura nyaya yemari. Hapana ari kundinzwa nekuti hapana ari kuziva zvandiri kutaura. Vashoma vari kundinzwa. Nokuti ndakutaura chinhu chekuti hamusi kunyatsonzwa. I just spoke in a foreign language. And for a lot of us, money is a foreign language. And hence why at this particular time, every single one of us is concerned about our finances. Now, we're privileged to have someone who speaks about money all the time. She's an award-winning consumer journalist, and she's a host on TV. You've seen her many times. Her name is Maya Fisher-French, and she's an award-winning South African personal financial journalist, and she's the presenter of Money Matters on ENCA. Maya is the force behind the money management website mayaonmoney.co.za, and editor of My Money, My Lifestyle, the personal finance section of the Sunday newspaper, City Press. Her latest book, Money Questions Answered, is a great personal finance resource, and she's also a multiple winner of a Sanlam Award for Excellence in Financial Journalism in the Consumer Financial Education category. In fact, that award, they should just call it the Maya Fisher-French Award for Consumer Journalism, and she stops entering it so other people can start winning it. She's also a great personality. I owe her lunch, and she stays in the beautiful city, which is only second to Johannesburg in Cape Town. Maya, welcome and good evening.
Thank you, Gerald, for that introduction. And I apologize. Apparently, we are sending our cold front up to Johannesburg along with the coronavirus, because, of course, we were the epicenter. And all those people who kept phoning me and asking me if I was okay, I reciprocate. I hope you're all okay. I'm not coming anywhere near Gauteng for a while until this whole thing settled down. So stay safe. So we're obviously talking about saving today. That's why we're all here. We want to save money. But one of the questions we always ask ourselves as South Africans, and it's the reason actually I think the genesis and the drive behind the South African, behind SASI, the South African Saving Institute, is the dire lack of saving in South Africa. We are known as a nation who does not save. Now, when I say we don't save, we have a negative savings rate. Our households negatively save, which means that we are currently actually drawing on our savings, let alone adding to it. And the rhetoric is, or the conversation is, oh, we're too poor. Look at the poverty, lifestyles, it's too hard to live on my salary. We've got all these excuses. But this doesn't match what we see in countries, our peers, countries with similar income groups with us, similar disparity in terms of earnings, countries in SADC, our SADC trading partners, the greater sub-Saharan Africa, even India, Brazil. We substantially save less than they do. They all have savings rates, positive savings rates. So I've really looked at this and tried to understand what is it about South Africa that makes us so different. And I kind of think there is something around the idea of our credit extension. The fact that it is so easy for us to buy stuff on credit, that it doesn't allow us to build a culture of savings. Now, I'm not blaming the credit industry. It's obviously, we're adults, we take responsibility. But in other countries where the credit extension isn't quite as prolific, if you want to buy something, you save for it. In South Africa, almost zero people think that way. Most people don't think, I want to buy a washing machine. Oh, I'm going to buy a car. Let me save for it. It's always, how do I access credit? What is the interest rate going to be? In fact, people don't even ask that. They just want to know if they can access it, okay? So, and one of the things that I started looking at when I looked at these countries with higher savings rates is I also noticed when I compared their credit extension, so as countries' credit extension developed, so their savings rate declined. Now, Turkey is a fantastic example. In the early 2000s, Turkey had a pretty good savings rate, and they had virtually no household credit in terms of consumption credit. It just didn't really exist. And then they introduced credit cards. And by 2014, I happened to go there for a financial literacy conference, so that's why I know my stats about this, is that by 2014, they had gone from nearly zero household debt to 55% of household income they were indebted to that level. The debt level was 55% of household income. And over 1 million people could no longer keep up with their credit card payments. And at the same time, Turkey's savings rates dropped to the lowest in 3 decades. Now, this kind of makes sense to me because think about it this way. If you live in a country that doesn't have access to credit and you want to buy a washing machine, you can't pull out your credit card. You can't do hire purchase. So what do? You put maybe it's a 2,000 Rand washing machine for 10 months. You put your 200 Rand away. Whilst you're putting that 200 Rand away, what happens? You create a savings pool. You're starting to save. Now everybody's saving for their washing machines and they're creating a savings pool. After 10 months, they draw down, they buy their washing machine. But in month 11, they now start again, putting 200 Rand away for their next goal, again, creating a savings pool. What happens in South Africa? So in South Africa, that same washing machine, we don't save, right? We want the washing machine today. We can buy it today. In fact, we're encouraged to buy it today and put it on credit. So that 200 Rand that we would have saved, we now pay as an installment. But instead of paying it off over 10 months, we pay it off over 24 months. That is the difference between fees and interest and credit insurance. If you add all of those costs together, it actually extends those repayments to 24 months. That means we pay an extra 200 Rand a month for a further 14 months for exactly the same washing machine. So if you want to know where our savings are in the 14 months of interest and fees that we pay out all the time to credit providers. And I maintain that actually what we're doing in this behavior is we're taking our potential assets, our potential savings within households, and we've transferred that incredible wealth to the credit industry. We are making them very, very wealthy and making ourselves very, very asset poor. So then I went and I thought, well, how do I look at this on a national level? Can I apply a number to this? Can I work out the loss of savings of this perpetual need to have today and pay later? So I'm going to show you a slide now. This is actually a slide of the consumer credit market. This comes from the National Credit Regulator. This is figures, I think, from last year. I haven't updated with the latest figures. I'm hoping you can see the slide now because I can't see it. But this slide actually represents the entire credit market, just to give you an idea, in South Africa is worth 1.8 trillion Rand. 1.8 trillion Rand is what we as households currently owe. Okay, that's what's outstanding. Now that makes up our mortgages. It also makes up car finance. So that's asset-based borrowing. But of that, 410 billion is short-term debt, credit cards, store cards, personal loans, the stuff we just, that I would call consumer debt to be able to just consume. There's no asset behind that. So I spoke to debt counselors who obviously see a lot of credit agreements. And I said to them, what on average are the fees and interest that are paid on these short-term loans? And they said on average, when somebody's repaying short-term debt, whether it's credit cards, store cards, personal loans, payday loans, it works out on average at about 41%. 41%. So what that means is that of that 410 billion, 168 billion is what we pay in interest and fees so that we can consume today and pay later. That is, so I'm not talking about the money you've spent on the stuff. We need stuff. I need clothes. I want nice clothes. I have shoes. I need groceries. I need things. But do I want to go and pay an additional 168 billion rand so that I can consume today and pay later? And I wonder what would happen to our savings industry and our investment industry if we could put that 168 billion into those savings instead. And, it's easy to say this, okay? But what I find is that when I speak to people and you're thinking, well, hold on a second, I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know that my washing machine was going to take me 24 months to pay off instead of 10 months. I didn't understand. I didn't realize that 41% of what I borrow is, or over and above that, I will pay in interest and fees. And that is because it's actually often very difficult to understand. I mean, how, you know what you pay every month, but have you ever added that all up over the full period and understood the total cost? And one of the products that really, really disguises how much you spend on credit is our credit cards. And I want to show you some information on credit cards and why I'm seriously not a fan of a credit card unless you pay it off in full every month. If you have a credit card of 20,000 Rand, so that's your outstanding balance, you've bought some stuff, you owe 20,000 Rand on your credit card. And you decide, you know what, I've listened to Maya, I am never, ever, ever using my credit card again. I'm going to put it in a drawer and I'm going to lock it away. But I'm just going to pay the minimum amount. That's the little amount on the statement that the bank wants from me. And by the way, that minimum amount is very attractive. It's quite small. It feels very manageable. And when people say, I'm managing my debts, they're thinking about that minimum payment on their credit card. Do you have any idea how long it would take you to pay off that 20,000 Rand if you just paid the minimum amount every single month? The answer is a staggering 25 years. Most people say to me 2 years, some push it out to 5 years. It is actually 25 years. And the reason is credit cards, or revolving loans, by the way, these loans that just you can put money in and out all the time. One of their features is that minimum amount is usually based on the outstanding balance. So in many cases, you can go have a look at your credit card statement. Some may be a bit higher, some may be a bit lower, but on average, it's about 3% of the outstanding balance. So if you are paying off 3% of the outstanding balance, as that balance reduces, so your minimum payment reduces. So maybe when you owed 20,000 Rand, your minimum payment was 600 Rand, but as it pays down and you only owe 10,000 Rand, your minimum balance drops to 300 Rand. So as you can understand, as your balance is getting lower, so you're paying back lower, and slowly that repayment period actually starts to lengthen out. It gets very difficult to actually repay it. But we never feel that payment, and we never understand that because we're constantly using a credit card. It goes in, it goes out. So we don't understand how that mechanism actually works. And I want to show you the amortization curve of a credit card if you only paid the minimum, as I described. You had a 20,000 Rand balance and you paid it off only the minimum. And you'll see from this graph that I hope you can all see that there is a blue section. And that blue section is quite small and it sort of pays off down over the period. But as it pays off, that is the amount that you actually spent. The big red part, the huge red part up there, is all the interest that you're going to pay. And that is an incredibly important thing to understand when you're taking credit, is how much are you paying back just based on the actual purchase you made, and how much of that is actual credit, is interest you're paying back. And that is, again, why I would argue that of that red section that you saw in that graph, that red section is the opportunity, lost opportunity, the opportunity cost of credit versus being able to save. Imagine if all of that money was going into a monthly savings for yourself for the future. And, I have said that, I'm really do believe in personal responsibility. I think it's up to us to take control of our money. And we can't just keep saying, oh, well, it's so hard. It's just, there's too much temptation out there. But I also challenge the industry to a certain degree. And I also challenge them to say, have a look at the kind of messaging that you're sending out. Now, I'll give you an example of an SMS. This is an SMS that went out last Women's Day. This was August 2019, last year. And this SMS was sent out from a large financial institution in South Africa. It has a big investment, don't worry, it's not Absa. It has a very big investment arm. But I have never, so this SMS was basically around saying, you as a woman, you deserve better, you want to look after your family, so how about a 200,000 Rand loan? Okay, just to let that sink in. That is sold as you being a good woman and a good mother and looking after your family is taking. I have never seen an SMS like that coming out saying, start investing for your family. And we all know when we open apps, when we open up anything, quite frankly, our inbox is forever full of credit opportunities. So we are also constantly challenged by the world of credit out there. So what I'm going to challenge you to do now in Savings Month is to reset your mindset. Stop believing that credit is a financial solution. It is not a financial solution. Start believing that you can live without credit. And I'm not talking about house credit and cars. I'm talking about the day-to-day consumption credit that we are all caught up to our eyeballs in. And start believing that it is possible to actually save towards our goals rather than constantly relying on credit. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to sit there and say, it's not possible. I've got this credit card debt. I'll never pay it off unless I win the lotto, cash in my pension. That's the favorite one. I'm just going to cash in my pension, settle it, and then I'll push the restart button, right? Isn't that what you're all thinking? The problem is you go and do that, nothing changes. Nothing changes. You will be back in the same position in a year's time because you haven't changed your behavior. You haven't changed the mindset that you do not need credit, that you can save towards your goals. So I want to share with you a little bit, and this is what I'm going to talk about in my webinar on Saturday, is the journey that I take my money makeover candidates on every single year. So for the last 4 years, I've been incredibly privileged to be part of the Money Makeover program challenge with City Press. This year it was in You magazine. So those of you who have signed up here and are avid readers of You magazine, you will have come across these contestants this year, and you'll be following their journeys, hopefully. For the last, and Absa has been our sponsor, and what we do is we actually pair each of our candidates up with a financial advisor, an Absa financial advisor. And I have to tell you something, in 4 years, this is my 4th year, you cannot believe what we achieve in 6 months, how much debt these people are able to pay off and their emergency savings they're able to build and the investments they're able to start. And in fact, I'm busy right now going through, because we've got our final on the 18th of July. We've got the big finale where we announce the winner. There's a winner and a runner-up from this. So it's all very exciting. So I've been busy going through their motivation letters. I've been going through their credit scores. I've been going through how much debt they've paid off. I'm like blown away. I'm blown away. I have to tell you, I get inspired by them. I am inspired by them. And they're not special people. They're not blessed with any great, gifts. They've simply followed a plan. And that's the plan, obviously, I'm going to share with you on Saturday, but it's really very simple. Have a budget, know what you spend, live within your means, create a debt repayment plan, and start also looking at investing. So over this period, I must just tell you, one of the candidates, 3 of our candidates during this lockdown period have had a reduction in income. So they've achieved all of this whilst having a reduction in income. So even COVID and lockdown is not an excuse to not get your finances in order. And one of the candidates, I just love quoting her, Nono, she said to me, Maya, I cannot believe what I've achieved in 6 months. And I didn't get a salary increase. I didn't get a bonus. Nothing happened. Nothing changed, except that couple of R100 here and there that I was just leaving and not allocating and just wasting. I just channeled it. I just gave it purpose. I gave my money purpose. And that's actually what you need to be doing. You need to be giving your money purpose. So we're going to go through that on Saturday. So I really, really hope you're going to join me. Hopefully by now you've gone and run off and thrown your credit cards down the toilet. But I'm going to really take you on a journey on Saturday. And I also am going to talk about how to prioritize debt over investing and saving. Because I think also we get caught up in this focus on paying off debt, paying off debt. And we don't also start on the other side, on the investing side. Because if you look at your net asset worth or your net worth, for example, you would have your net worth is made up of your assets and your liabilities. So liabilities are your debts, assets is what you own. And when you're looking at your net worth, obviously you want your liabilities to reduce, your debt to reduce, but you also want your assets to grow. And there's an incredible power of compounding by investing over time and allowing your money to grow for you. And you can really get that money to grow for you. So I'm also going to be going through that really to make sure that we're able to prioritize debt, emergency savings, because that, quite frankly, right now is like a really hot topic, but also looking at how do you allocate that towards the future and developing assets. So I think that's really going to round up for me my views on Savings Month. Savings Month, there's a lot of money in your account to save. You just have to stop paying interest and fees and move all that money that you're paying on interest and fees on in your credit and debts that you have, and allocate that towards building your future. Gerald, I think I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you, Maya. Now, before you get too relaxed, Maya, if you just cast your eyes on your phone, there's probably a couple of questions which you might be able to help us out with, which I'll pick up some questions as well. Now, obviously, the panelists today will try and cover as much ground in terms of the questions which have come in from the audience, and we think we need to try and address some of them. Other specific questions which will be addressed in specific webinars, we'll try and take it and take it into those webinars, which is why it's important that we sign up for the whole series, because it's a package deal. Every webinar will have something different to offer. But the main question which seems to be coming through as a theme, I think Yolanda, Rosemary have spoken about whether it's more important to pay off debt or whether it's important to save. I think first question was really, what's the difference between saving and investing? Now, essentially, it's a similar behavior in that you're putting money aside now for a future purpose. The thing about saving is that it's money normally that's assigned for a specific goal. So you're saving for education, you're saving for marriage, you're saving for deposit for a home. And it's money which, because it has a specific amount, at some point in the future, you're going to take that full amount and use it for its purpose. I think it's important that one of the mistakes a lot of people make is that you save without a goal, or you never stop saving. It's important when you reach your goal, you make another decision. So if I'm going to save 100 Rand, when I've saved 100 Rand, celebrate and then move on to the next target. Investing is slightly different, because although it's money which is for a goal, you're willing to watch it go up and down and fluctuate over time. So there's a certain thing called risk. So you're willing to accept more risk on money you invest, because your purpose is to grow it. Whereas for investing, you don't really want to accept that much risk. You want it to fulfill its purpose. Now, Maya, have you looked at any of the questions which have jumped out at you?
Yes. So So I said, yeah, one of them, which I like, is I'm a first-year student and I'm currently looking for ways to save for my future. What would you suggest is the best way to save given my limited allowance as a student? That's Yolanda. And I mean, obviously, we're not allowed to give financial advice, so I can't tell you specific products. But what I can say is that I would start off really by understanding, Yolanda, what are your expenses? So you say your limited allowance. What do you need to use that allowance for? Are there, food, travel, transport? Make sure you understand where that money is going and understand your actual essential needs. So you've got a fairly good idea of that. You also need to start putting a little bit of money away, just so that you can, what I would call your emergency money, just kind of money that if you have a bad month or something, an event happens that you, especially I see quite a few questions around black tax. Black tax, quite frankly, that emergency fund, very important to make sure that you have, you have some sufficient buffer so that if you're having to assist some family member, that medical bills or something happens. But really, Yolanda, at your age, the best thing you can do is open a tax-free savings account. Learn about them. You look at something that's got a growth in it that actually invests in the stock market that you can grow over time, because the biggest opportunity for you is compounding growth. Okay, it is absolutely massive. If you start investing now and you keep doing that for the next 10, 15, 20 years, you have no idea the compounding and massive opportunity you have. But with compounding and with that massive growth on your investment comes tax. And let me tell you, the tax man, you can sit with money and you only earning maybe 10% a year. It's not like you're a massively wealthy person, but it keeps compounding. And eventually when you come to draw the money, the tax man says, hold on a second, you owe me some of that. So to straight away put any of your longer term investments into something that protects it from tax, like a tax-free savings account, would definitely be the first step.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Gerald, any others? Do you want me to handle another one?
Let's take one more and then we'll move on to the next introduction. And obviously, everyone who's watching, if your question is not addressed today, we are keeping them on record, and each of the webinars will address all the questions.
Gerald, I'll take one more because it's a question I've written about this a lot. So I thought I'm probably reasonably educated enough to answer the question. Mapula, why do RSA retail bonds rates decrease monthly? Is it a safe investment? This is incredibly important. So an RSA retail bond, when you invest, whatever rate, so the RSA retail bond, by the way, is issued by National Treasury. It's not issued by a bank, it's issued by National Treasury. And they give you a fixed rate for a period of time. So you could choose a 2-year, 3-year, or 5-year period. So if you've invested at 10%, for example, it is guaranteed. You will get your 10% for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But as a new investor, so if a new investor comes in the following month, it may have dropped to 9.5% or 9%, I think even down to about 7.5% on some of them. And the reason for that is the RSA retail bond is not priced off interest rates like your bank deposits are. So your bank deposit actually follows something called the repo rate, which is the rate set by the South African Reserve Bank. And it has a whole different other mechanism that goes with it. All our loans, our bonds, car finance are also priced off that. The RSA retail bond is actually priced off the South African bond rate. So that is the rate at which South African government issues its bonds, its debt. And that's a completely different mechanism. And what actually happened, and I wrote so much about it, I was tweeting out about it, at one point when Moody's downgraded us, and this is going to sound a bit bizarre, but when Moody's downgraded us, obviously South African debt became a lot more expensive and it went up to 11%. So the bonds were having to pay you interest of 11% to convince you to invest in it, just to be, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And there was this amazing opportunity to lock in at the RSA retail rate at 11%. But things have calmed down and everyone stopped panicking and people are not so worried about it anymore. So the South African government basically has been able to issue bonds out at a much lower rate. I think it's down at 7.5%, the yields have dropped down to 7.5%, 8%. So That is actually what happens with the RSA retail bond. It does very, very well when South African bonds become very expensive, or from an interest perspective, they pay out good interest. So it's a very interesting mechanism to look at when interest rates are being cut in South Africa, because it doesn't necessarily correlate. And I still think, yes, it's not as high as it was, I think in February or February, it shot up to 11%, but it is still offering a pretty good interest rate relative to most fixed deposits at the moment, simply because it's priced off the bond rate and not the repo rate. So there's my very technical answer for you, Gerald.
Thank you very much, Maya. Now, I've got questions here from Lindy, Monica, and Tulile. Your questions are a bit more complex. I think what you need to do is to log on and to join the webinar with Arabela, who I'm about to introduce. Lindy is saying, where's the best place to save in this current turbulent times? Whilst Monica is saying, where can I save for my children's education? Should I take out a tax-free investment or an educational fund? And also Tulile, number 11 question is saying, no savings, I don't have much savings. How can I be assisted by something like a bursary or scholarship, as I do not qualify for NSFAS? We'll look into those questions because some of them will need us to do a bit of research on your behalf. But our next speaker will be hosting a webinar with myself on the 18th of July. Now, obviously, Maya is starting and kicking off the webinars this Saturday at 11 a.m. If you missed the webinar, the best thing about it is that the link remains live, so you can watch it at your own time. You don't necessarily feel that you've lost out. But on the 18th of July, the following week, we're going to have a webinar that's going to be hosted by Mr. Arabela Mulaudzi. Now, in the world of money markets, finance, and economics, this is where he has built his reputation as a leading commentator, reporter, anchor, and writer. A firm believer and advocate for financial literacy, Arabela focuses on education for small business owners, students, and entrepreneurs alike to make the most of their money. He studied a BCom in accounting at the University of Johannesburg and went on to pursue a career as a financial and business journalist at CNBC Africa and ENCA. He's now with 702 and is a well-known speaker and host. He's also a well-known single bachelor in South Africa. He is not yet married, so I get so many requests for this guy's number. He's also one of the kindest guys you'll ever meet around. So Arabela, talk us through what we can expect on my birthday, which is the 18th of July.
Gerald, I can't even begin to thank you enough, I suppose, for that intro as well. Thank you so much for that. For the beginning part mostly, and not necessarily the second half of that. Certainly the 18th of July is going to be the ability for both of us and so many other people to be able to engage, to enhance this discussion around financial literacy and finding the ultimate ways to save money. What are the money hacks? The best way to perhaps build within the money you currently have. I want to start off this session though, Gerald, by giving you this scenario. The year is 1998. I'm only 10 years old. And at that stage, my mother and I have gone out every Friday pretty much to go to, at the time, Pizza Hut, before it left South Africa and now made its way back. But at that point, every Friday was pizza night, and we were able to do that. I went to a really great school in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg, and everything was absolutely great. My mother had a car. We were able to pretty much afford and buy anything we wanted to at the time, because my mother, having worked at a really great job, was able to really budget and work her way with regards to the money that she earned at the time. Unfortunately, later on in 1998, my mother was retrenched. The year now is 2020. My mother has not worked a day since 1998. Yet, I've been able to go through primary school, through high school, through university, and we currently sit in a situation where my mother owns her own house. I own my own house. I have a car. I managed this year to buy my mother a car. At the same time, we're able to afford, and even though COVID-19 is here and it has made things absolutely and incredibly difficult across the board, one thing's for sure, my second name is meant to say unenhlanhla ngokukhula nekhaya, which means he's lucky because he grew up with a home or in a home. And the most important thing in a time like this has been the fact that both my mother and I have a home. But all of that was afforded to us, and my mother wasn't even working. So what happened? How did we get here? How did I get to understand and want to participate in the money discussion for so many years when I realized that it was something that I didn't have? I didn't have money at any stage pretty much until I officially started working. Well, it's all because of the simple things. My mother realized the moment she got retrenched that the most important thing is going to be the roof on her head. So what did she do? She decided to take her entire severance package and pay off the house we lived in at the time. That was the most respectful and probably the riskiest move she could have made, because from then on, there would be no income. But she did not care. She just wanted us to have a house to live in. So our lives continued. And at that point, as a 10, 11-year-old boy who's still in primary school, unbeknownst to me that life was about to change, I needed to find a way to make us money as well. There could have been many ways, including criminal activity. But that's not the route my mother pushed me towards. My mother pushed me at the time we were living in a complex in the south of Johannesburg. And I was lucky enough to live in that complex where there were 72 houses. So every weekend, I could actually go out and wash cars. Now, it's the last thing an 11-year-old boy wants to do is go out and wash cars for so long and almost every single weekend. But if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have been able to put paraffin in the paraffin stove we used to cook, to iron, to help us clean everything that we needed at the time, even to buy candles that we were using. Now, I'm talking about a mid-market suburban area, and here is this family of this young boy and his mother who live under candlelight with a paraffin stove. That continued from primary school right through until I finished matric. So what happened? As we were able to get the money we got from me washing cars and even some money from my father at the time as he gave us money every month, what we began to realize was we would need to use this money sparingly. I still needed school fees. I still needed clothing. We needed food. She needed clothing. We needed to be able to get by. And we did it together. How? Because inadvertently, my mother found the ultimate savings hacks. She didn't put money away. She couldn't put money away. But she was able to save while spending the money she had. She didn't just spend all recklessly, for example. She took what she could find and she decided that it would go a long way. Now you can imagine with no electricity, it means you have no fridge. So if you cook food, you kind of have to make sure that it goes away very quickly and gets eaten, right? But we figured out another way to move things along. And it may not have been sustainable, but it was certainly working for us at the time. We would ensure that the food we cooked was actually put away in a steel bowl. That steel bowl would then be covered, and we would put that on the tile floor inside the house, because hopefully that stays cooler for longer. And that was what we had. Sometimes in winter, we would risk ants and other animals actually eating the food because we'd actually have to find some way of covering the food in order to leave it outside. But all of those are the small little hacks. You made food now to try and sustain you for a little bit longer. When we went shopping, whether it be just for millipap, whether it be for things like Morvite, whether it be even if it is just for milk, the first and most important thing we did was finding the special or the sale that was going on at a particular retailer. And we would sit at home. And believe it or not, a lot of suburban areas used to get a newspaper from Caxton that was, regional within their own suburb. In the north, in Randburg, it's called the Randburg Sun. In the south, in the south of Johannesburg, where I live, or lived back at the time, it was the Southern Courier. Now, we'd scour through the Southern Courier and find whether it be Game, whether it be Checkers, ShopRite, Pick n Pay, all of those. And we'd need to find, of course, one that fits the mold, that fits into our budget. And we would shop according to what is in that paper. And those were the only things we would buy. What have we done at that stage? We have ensured that we're not just buying recklessly. We aren't just buying whatever suits us or whatever tastes great, but also what saves us money. And unfortunately, sometimes you forego things, but it's the lesson that has been ingrained in me that I now understand so well. Because even though some of us feel like I need to save R1 million, and the best way to do that is by putting money away, sometimes the way you spend can also be a way to save. Look at the way you are spending your money. Have you done a price check? Have you actually done your research on that particular item or items? And is that item specifically the one you need right there and then? There's also, for big ticket items in particular, the need to perhaps step back. And even though you may feel like you need that item right now, give yourselves a few days. Some people say it's a 30-day rule, which means that for 30 days, you hold off on the item you think you need to buy. And after 30 days, you come back and decide, do I really need it now? And at that point in time, you can then make the decision. So I've been lucky enough to get that schooling, that understanding, that learning from my mother from a very difficult situation, but one that is still ingrained in me, one that I hope to impart, one that has helped me understand the whole notion of saving isn't only about putting money away. It is also about ensuring that the way you spend your money isn't reckless, isn't beyond your means. There's an ability, and a lot of people have this, particularly when we start out with our first jobs. The first thing we do is we buy perhaps that car. And nobody's saying don't buy the car. But there's a difference between being able to buy a car and being able to afford that car. If the tires were to fall off tomorrow, would you be able to replace them? If you were to get into an accident tomorrow, would you be able to pay the excess on that insurance? If you are unable to do any of those things, you haven't saved mentally even, and that's going to get you into a whole lot of trouble at a later stage. How you spend your money determines how much you can save in the long run. I'm not saying don't spend. I'm saying if you're going away on a holiday, do you need to stay in a 5-star hotel? If you're going on a trip and you need to go to a meeting, we don't necessarily need Uber X, the Uber Black, that is. So all those little measures help us eventually understand, know, and realize that there are certain things that we just don't need. Now, this is just one of the elements that come about with the ultimate savings hack that we're going to be discussing on the 18th of July for Gerald's birthday as well. It's going to be a very critical and important discussion. And I hope that gives you an understanding. I'm hoping to share a whole lot more stories. As you can tell, this is not just something that I will just speak about because I've learned about it from a book or just from somebody else. but purely because it is a life lesson that has been ingrained in me and allowed me to be where I want to be. And it's difficult, certainly is, because you forget that you have to forego a whole lot of things. But one thing you don't forego is the prosperity and the ability to know where your finances are and what you're spending it on in the long run. Gerald, I'll hand over back to you.
Wow, wow, wow. Arabela, thank you for that testimony. And I think Arabela's story is really a reflection of a lot of people who are watching tonight, that saving is a lived experience. And for all of us to be here, it's because we're living through having to save. Some of us are trying to make those decisions. And indeed, Arabela's mother made that decision to be in control of her family's fate. And by fate, it means she addressed the four main areas in which she had to think of considering saving. Because saving is not always about cash. As Arabela said, it's about your behavior. F in fate stands for food. She cut back on the food because the food needed to sleep overnight, not in the fridge. She had a plan around saving on the food. Accommodation, important. She chose to pay off her bond. And I think retrenchment is also one of the topics we're going to address on the 18th of July, because a lot of South Africans are going through that right now. What should I pay? Should I pay off my debts, or should I think about my future? Retrenchment is definitely that conversation we're having on the 18th of July. So some of the questions which are here, please come through on the 18th. We are going to talk in depth and we'll be able to interact then. T is transport, the car you're driving. As Arabela said, can you afford the car you're driving, or can you just simply, did you just buy it? And, you know, with COVID-19, all our cars parked. Some of us have to think about repurposing them. Should I use it for delivering food and make money from that? And lastly, E in fate can be education or entertainment. When there's little money in the house, entertainment is not even on the option list of things to do. But education, definitely. Investing in a child's education, it pays off in the long run, but also you need to sometimes take a step back to move forward. So thank you, Arabela, for that. We'll pick up a few questions with you after I've introduced our next host, who will be hosting a webinar on the 25th of July. And we're privileged this evening not only to have one award-winning financial journalist, we've got two. And our second award-winning financial journalist is Krista van Heerden, and she's a financial journalist who's passionate about financial education and inclusion. She's part of the Just One Lap team, an investment education platform, and has a weekly podcast titled The Fat Wallet, which covers all questions related to money that many people are too afraid to ask. Krista is the former editor of Finweek.com and co-hosted the TV show Finweek Money Matters. Time travel, the ability to raise a goat, and writing a masterpiece are amongst her personal and professional goals. And I'm sure you'll enjoy her outspoken style. Krista, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gerald. Such an honor for me to be here this evening. So I would like to speak today just about two simple misconceptions that almost all of us have when we start to earn money. And then I'm going to give you a tip that you can start applying to your finances from today, from this very minute, to feel like you have a better grip on your financial situation. So as all of the speakers before me alluded to, and as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, a lot of us have lost our income, either all of it or part of it during this time. It's an enormously stressful situation. And you might think that because you're not earning an income at the moment, or maybe you're in the process of getting retrenched, which is just like heartbreaking and difficult, you might think that there's nothing that you can do for your future or for your financial future. And today I want to talk about that idea. So if we start with the idea that you only need to worry about money when you have money. This is something that I think all of us believe. So When you are a kid or before you start earning an income, you think, I'll worry about that later. And I certainly remember that from when I was younger. I was a waitress in my teens. And I think my waitressing was more about getting out of the house on the weekend than it was about the money. So the money came in and the money went out. And I don't know where it went. To this day, I won't be able to tell you. And then when you get to that point where you start working, you only have enough money to cover your basic expenses. So you can maybe get a roof over your head. Maybe you can pay for food. And if you're lucky, you can pay for some transport to get to and from your job. And when you're in that situation, which is a very common thing that almost all of us go through, unless you're incredibly lucky to have parents who help you out, when you're in that situation, you tend to think, you know what, I'll deal with my financial situation once the money comes in. But let's say we had to run a little experiment, and I came to you and I said, I have 20,000 Rand in startup capital. And I want you to go off and come back with a plan for a small business that you want to start. I don't mind what the plan is. I give you no guidance. I just say, if you come back to me with a business plan, you can have 20,000 Rand in startup capital. If I said that to you, I can almost guarantee that when you come back to me with your business plan, whatever the plan is, will include some sort of sense what your costs will be when you start a small business, and you would know what you need to bring in order to be profitable, right? This is something that we almost understand instinctively, right? A business has costs and then it brings in money, and that needs to be part of a business plan. But if I came to you now and I said, look, I'm going to give you a job, your income is going to be 20,000 Rand per month. And I want you to come back to me. The contingency of this offer is I want you to come back to me with a personal finance plan. The plan that you come back with, I'd be much less able to predict what that plan would be. And that is a really interesting problem that we face when it comes to personal finances. In business, nobody expects a business to bring in money before they make a business plan. We all understand that you have to have a business plan before you can start a business. But with personal finances, we don't do this. And this is not because we're silly or stupid. It's because when it comes to a business, we understand almost instinctively the goal of a business. The goal of a business is to make money. Right? And when you understand that goal, the structures to get that money, they almost fall into place automatically, right? Because you're like, all right, I'm going to start a small business. I have 20,000 Rand. These are going to be my costs. This is what I need to sell this product as. And at the end of it, I'm going to have money. But when it comes to personal finances, the goal is a lot less clear. Right? So you can say, all right, in personal finances, the goal is also to have more income than expenses. But the problem with that view is there's a follow-up question almost in the answer, which is why. Like this, why do you need your income to exceed your expenses? Why do you need to save money? Like the definition for profits and the definition for savings is exactly the same thing. But why? Right? And this question is not a question about money. This actually has nothing to do with money. This is a question about life and about what a good life looks like to you. Which brings me, so my first misconception is that you need to have money to make choices about your money. That is not true. For the same reason that you don't need to bring in money with a business before you can draw up a business plan. A personal financial plan can happen if you have zero money. It can happen if you're in debt. It can happen if you can only cover your basic expenses. And it starts not with anything to do with money. And I think this puts a lot of people off, really. Like when you start this journey into into taking charge of your finances, a lot of us avoid it because we think we need to have some sort of specialist knowledge. Like, we need to know what an interest rate is. We need to know how the stock market works. We need to have some sort of knowledge. But really, it just comes down to a question that has very little to do actually with money. And that brings me to the second misconception that most of us have when we start earning money. And that is the idea that money brings us happiness. Now, I know, especially in these times, like, if you just rolled your eyes at me because I'm implying that money doesn't bring happiness, I get where that comes from, because I have certainly been in a position where, you know, if you can barely cover your basic expenses, or maybe you can cover your basic expenses, or you can cover your basic expenses and just a little bit more, when you get a little bit of extra money, what you feel is relief, right? And this is what Dr. Khametse was saying earlier. Like, when you look at a holistic approach to money, when you remove stress and you feel relief, that increases your happiness. And I'm not disputing that by any means. But science shows us that once we reach a certain level of emotional comfort, our happiness actually doesn't increase proportionally. And the problem with not understanding this is you will get trapped in a spending cycle. Because when you start out, more money does bring more happiness. But then you reach a point where you can cover your basic expenses, maybe you can afford a few luxuries, and you get an increase, and suddenly your happiness doesn't increase. So what do? You go out and spend money, right? So I got earlier this month in my inbox a letter that said, are you feeling down during lockdown? Come to our ladies saving, or our ladies shopping event in July. And if I didn't have an understanding of the fact that spending money doesn't necessarily increase my happiness in the long run, that would have been a very appealing offer. Because I am feeling down, I am feeling stressed, I have been trapped in my house for a long time. And when I don't know what brings me happiness, when somebody else says, hey, this will bring you happiness, very outright, I mean, they're not even being subtle about it. When they say this will bring you happiness, why wouldn't you believe them? All right? So this brings us to something called hedonic adaptation. Right? The reason why our happiness doesn't increase with our income proportionally after a certain limit has to do with hedonic adaptation. So this is a tendency that we have as human beings, and I mean, it's really great actually, to return to our previous level of happiness despite major positive or negative events in our lives. And that's why the mood boost that we get from buying things doesn't last forever. We adapt to the feeling of having it. So I like to use my Fitbit as an example. I have an old Fitbit. It's like one of the first ones that came out, and it's looking terrible. The screen is cracked. It's not waterproof. It's a bit of a nightmare. And now there's a new Fitbit on the market, and I've been eyeing it for months and months because I really want to have this new Fitbit. But I know what will happen, right? So I'll get the Fitbit, I'll unbox it, I'll have a moment of pleasure in that unboxing, and I'm not denying that. There is absolutely pleasure in spending. I'm not saying that that's not true, right? I'll have pleasure in unboxing it. I'll go for a run for the first 5 or 10 or 20 times. Each time I'll be so impressed with the Fitbit and the superior tracking and the GPS technology. But after a while, I am going to forget that this Fitbit brought me pleasure. It's a short-term feeling. It doesn't lead to long-term happiness. So a good life, when we talk about a good life in this question, like what does a good life look like to me? This has to do with the long run. This is not about short-term spending. So you don't need to have a cent to your name to ask yourself, once I can cover my basic expenses, which are important, and I'm not trying to say that they're not, but once I can cover my basic expenses, what does a good life look like to me? And the difference between this question and running a small business, which is what is the goal of a business to make a profit, is that there are as many answers to this question as there are people in the world. There's absolutely, your answer to this question is the right answer to this question, whatever that may be for you. But when we don't answer this question for ourselves, we adopt what the world tells us, which is that we can spend our way into happiness. So just to give you an example of what this is, I asked myself this question for the first time in 2013. And I have to say, over the years, my answer has changed, and it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter that we don't stay the same forever. But when I asked myself this question for the first time, I was working far from my house. I was doing a job that didn't bring me much joy or happiness. And I was just feeling discontented, and I would spend money and it wouldn't do anything for me. So I said, what does a good life look like to me? And I realized that spending 2 hours in a car every day to get to a job that I don't particularly enjoy, that doesn't make me happy. So I realized I need to travel less for work, right? That makes me happy. You can see that that has nothing to do with money. That is something else, right? Then I decided that I wanted to do a job that is meaningful, not just to me, but to the people around me. And I've been incredibly lucky to do that with just one lab. But that also isn't a question about money, and an idea about money. And then I realized that I wanted to have more time. I wanted to have more time to spend with my partner. I wanted to have more time to pursue things that made me happy. And again, that's not about money. And then I realized that I would really love to travel more. And out of the 4 things that I decided for myself would make a good life, only one of those things has to do with money, which is travel. It's not about the money. And this, sorry, Gerald, were you trying to say something?
No, I'm listening.
Oh, sorry.
It's feedback.
So the good life, just to recap, is about choice. And putting off financial choices until you have money is a really risky thing to do. So I got, just very quickly, before I started doing all of this, I got into a lot of trouble with debt. And this, what Maya was talking about right at the beginning of this presentation, that I could so relate to that. Because I was earning just enough money to cover my basic expenses. I was living in somebody's garage. And then a store credit card arrived in the mail. And because I hadn't asked myself this question, what does a good life look like to me? I thought, well, this is the answer. Like, I know that when I spend money, I feel better. And so I'm going to keep spending money. And that turned into a debt snowball that took me a very long time to get out of. So regardless of your income, regardless of what's happening with your financial situation at the moment, I want you to leave this webinar today and ask yourself, once I can cover my basic expenses, what is my good life? What is a good life for me? And then see, once you have the answer to this question, even if it changes over time, once you have this answer to this question, you'll see how that focuses your mind when it comes to spending. Because suddenly you can say, well, is it more important for me to have a Fitbit or to travel the garden route? Because I know what brings me long-term happiness, I know how to make that choice. It influences the choices that you make as you go along. And that's incredibly powerful. And that's all from me today, Gerald. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Krista. Now, I think, we're having robust discussions, and everybody, thank you, audience, for participating. We're running a bit behind time, but we are going to, introduce the last couple of speakers. And really the purpose of today is to give you a teaser of what you can expect in the weeks to come. We will also, before we close, tell you where we can continue an online chat with the panelists, and we obviously can have a few more questions and engagements on that panel. And a few people were asking what happened to the oranges that was behind me. They were removed because someone saw the comment that somebody made around the oranges. Now, The current lockdown has made us all particularly stressed financially. And financial stress often leads to impact on your physical well-being. And we're privileged to have two medical doctors who will be addressing us on the Saturday, the 1st of August. So I'm going to ask our two doctors to really just take us through what they will be addressing and discussing with us. Dr. Cindy van Heerden, she's a general medical practitioner, even though you wouldn't believe it. If you see her life, she's so busy on social media, broadcasting on the radio, on Kaya FM, and she has been a columnist even with Bona magazine while it was still with us. Sad news about what's happening to the print magazines. And Dr. Cindy is also a renowned public speaker and a queen on Twitter, with a passion to inspire and educate through the power of her diverse experiences. And I've known Cindy probably for 30 years. Cindy, please take us through the relationship between money and health, physical and mental. And then straight after Cindy, we'll be having Dr. Lesego putting on her other hat, which is that of being a financial well-being and health specialist, to also tell us what the two doctors can offer us on the 1st of August.
Thank you so much, Gerald, for that introduction. Yes, I've known you for a very long time, all the way back in Harare in Zimbabwe. So when my talk on the 1st of August will center around the stresses that come from from not having your finances in order. I think one of the things that I do on social media, I'm very open about my life. I'm very open about the challenges I've been through, and one thing that I do share is my journey with my credit card debts. So as Maya was speaking and I was listening to her, I could relate to most of the things that she's talking about. So when I came out of medical school, they throw cards at you. So they offer you all of these things, and it's exciting to be offered these cards with these big limits on them. And this is in 2006. And here we are in 2020, and I'm still grappling, struggling with credit card debts. I mean, revolving loan, I've been there, done that. Overdraft, been there, done that. And now I'm on my way to sorting out my credit card once and for all. But the stresses that come with, being financially unstable are, I can't put it into words, just how much strain it puts on you as a person, and certainly how much it strains your relationships. I think the one thing that I did for a long time was I tried to hide all of these things from my husband, because my husband's very financially astute, and he had spoken to me about what's going to happen when I start working and how I'm going to have all these cards thrown at me and so on. And I chose to accept those cards and accept the limits that came with them, but I didn't tell him about it. And he helped me out of that credit card debt twice. But the third time around, he was like, you know what? You're on your own. You must fix this. And I've been trying to fix it for the longest time. But it's stressful to be in a relationship or be in a situation where, every month that you earn a certain amount of money, but you can't enjoy your money because it's going to get taken away because you're paying off the debts and you're struggling. And it's like being in a hole that you can't get out of. And it affects you. It affects you a lot. And I think on the day that I do give my talk, I'll be encouraging people to get help as soon as they can. It's not worth it to sit and think the problems are going to go away, because they actually don't go away, right? So you can ignore them and feel better because you're ignoring them, but eventually it catches up with you. And those are the things that we need to be cognizant of. I think South Africa is going through a lot at the moment. COVID-19 has changed all of our lives. And certainly from an income perspective, job security is a concern for most people. So there's a lot of stress around that. I think people are concerned about the future because no one really knows what's going to happen. There's a lot of stress around that. But the one thing that we are able to do for those of us that are social butterflies, I mean, I can look at my bank account and I can admit that over the last 4 months, I've saved a lot of money by not going out. So I'm now trying to channel what I've saved into sorting out my debts, right? Because there's no going out, there's no socializing, there's no restaurants, and there's no tashes and all of those things that we're so used to. So I'm able to channel a lot of the money that I used to spend when I went out into sorting out my debts. And so, use this time. It's a bit of a quiet time for most people, especially socialites like me, to just reflect on your life, reflect on your issues, look at your finances and try and sort things out. So I'll be covering a lot of that on the day that we have our talk. But the main thing I want to say is that keeping quiet doesn't help. So, pretending that it's not happening is not going to help you in any way. It'll only add to your stress. So do get help as soon as you can. And yeah, we'll speak more on the day of my talk.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Now, I think it's important when we hear professionals, medical doctors, telling us that they struggle with finances, it reminds us all that it's not about education. It's not about how much you've learned. It's all about how you live and how you put everything you learn plus how you behave with regards to your money. Now, Dr. Leseko, we introduced a little bit earlier on. What is the relationship between money and your mental wellness? Is there a relationship with this gender-based violence, all the stuff we're seeing right now? Is this all part of financial strain showing in our society?
Gerald, thank you so much for that question. I'm also looking forward to the webinar that I'll be co-hosting with Dr. Cindy. I think it's important that we create these linkages. As human beings, we are both emotional, psychological, and physical beings, and our behavior actually is linked to how we're feeling mentally or emotionally. So a lot of, if you look at a lot of cases of gender-based violence, the perpetrators by and large are men, and analysis of these cases, most of these perpetrators have underlying undiagnosed mental conditions. And I did touch on it earlier when I did my keynote address, that stress-related conditions, depression, there's a link with financial distress. So these are all interrelated. So financial distress will lead to depression or anxiety. And in other cases, these men, for them to cope with that state of financial distress, they would use alcohol and other substances. So substance and alcohol abuse, which actually then leads to gender-based violence. And in South Africa, we're starting to see a very high incidence of femicides. So there's really a linkage between our finances, our emotional, psychological well-being, and also our physical well-being. So on the 1st of August, you have to come and join Dr. Cindy and I whilst we elaborate on those linkages. The other one that I want to touch on briefly is, the linkage between emotional overspending and our emotional status. So there's really quite a lot of linkages that we will be making on the day so that people can really start being aware and being empowered of some of these behaviors that are really holding them back in attaining a financial well-being. Thanks, Gerald.
We basically are reaching our last speaker for this evening. Remember, this evening is a teaser for the series of webinars. And this is probably the most important speaker of the evening, because as much as we all have challenges with our finances, most of us would like an indication of where the country is going. What can we expect in the next year, in the next 2 years? And someone who's really an expert at that study, which is economics, is Khotso. Mr. Khotso Radira is a senior macroeconomist in the FIC research at Absa, and he's been there for 9 years. As a macroeconomic strategist, Khotso specializes in fundamental South African and global economic trends, and is one of the 5 macroeconomists working on the South African economy and servicing the investment bank as well as the entire Absa retail bank. So he's got real oversight in terms of what we can expect in the future with regards to interest rates and the economy. His views and work are used across a host of different divisions within the bank and is a vital component of decision-making for both the bank and its clients. How it works is that if we know what interest rates will do in the future, we can make decisions around that. And prior to joining Absa, Khotso gained experience at the South African Reserve Bank and Investec Securities, where Khotso studied economics and econometrics. Hey, these long titles. Hey, danger. We've got somebody who's going to end our evening on a high, hopefully, and just remind us of where South Africa is going, because most of us don't have a choice. We can't catch planes and go to New Zealand or wherever we want to go. Khotso, what's the economy looking like and what can we anticipate?
Thank you, Gerald, for that introduction. I will take you through what we think the outlook for the South African economy is, I think, over the coming few quarters, but also going into 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the global economy into a great lockdown, but also has pushed the global economy into a deep recession, the worst perhaps that has been seen since the 1930s. And, as we think about this sort of shock, there are many unknowns about it, as the pandemic is still evolving and everybody is still learning, and it's affecting different economies quite differently. As we sort of think about sort of the magnitude and the speed at which economic activity has deteriorated over the past couple of months and quarter or so, you realize that it's unlike anything that has been experienced before. For those that have been watching the economy and markets quite closely for quite some time, and as we think about the outlook, I think it's quite important to emphasize that a lot depends on how the effectiveness of containment measures, but also the development of a vaccine as well, all of which are quite hard to predict at this stage. We've seen over the past couple of weeks, the IMF has come out and said that they are forecasting global economy to go into a deep recession, revising the forecast that they presented in April, now saying that 2021, the global growth will actually be a negative 4.9%, and perhaps showing a slight recovery into 2021. So this fact that the IMF has revised their forecast for the second time in about 2 months gives you a sense of how fluid and the situation is. Globally, we've also seen that policymakers have provided unprecedented supports to households, to firms, but also to try and sort of help financial markets in terms of trying to ease the shock. While this is quite important, I think, to help with the global recovery, at this stage it's still quite difficult to sort of predict what the new world or the new economy will look like once the shock has worked out of the system. And I think as we think about it as economists, as we sort of think about the modeling of the economic impact of this complex shock, remember the shock started as a health shock. It moved, became a supply side shock as economies went into a lockdown. It moved, it became a demand side shock as people started to spend less staying at home. And then it moved, it became a financial market shock as we saw the volatility in financial markets. So it has been quite a complex shock to go with, that has affected the global economy. So as we think about it, it's quite an uncertain time. And I think as the economy emerges from the lockdown, I think it's quite interesting to see how it performs. Perhaps as we start to think about the outlook for the economy, it's important to simplify it and say, let's look at the supply side, which is perhaps the private sector side. Our view first on the private sector side or industry side is that, perhaps the agriculture sector will do a lot better than most of the sectors. Much of that is related to the bumper harvest on the maize side. So we are forecasting the agri sector to continue growing by about 8% this year, versus other sectors. If you look at mining and manufacturing sector, our sense is that that sector, those two sectors will perhaps continue to see some improvement as the lockdown restrictions are eased. But our sense is that the outlook for them is still quite, dire. And as you know, there's going to be stop starts. If there's an infection or one individual is infected in a manufacturing plant, you're going to have stop starts going forward. We've seen from the PMI in the manufacturing sector that there's been some improvement in May, in June, but we are not too optimistic on the recovery of the sector. As we think about the construction sector, for example, we think that that sector will continue to struggle. And there are many reasons for that. One being that, we go into this shock or this recession where the sector was already struggling for 2 years and was struggling because government infrastructure is not growing. The SOEs, we know the problems with them, but also on the private sector side, business confidence was quite weak. And with an environment where business confidence was quite weak, the private sector investment was also not picking up. In an environment where there's so much uncertainty, it's likely that even projects that seemed viable at the start of 2020, some businesses are going to postpone them or some are going to cancel them indefinitely. So again, which then means that the construction sector, perhaps the recovery will be among the slowest out of all the sectors in the economy. And a lot of that will depend on one, government infrastructure, confidence picking up on the private sector side and seeing that construction investment taking place. We are not that optimistic on that. I think out of all the sectors, construction will be most affected. As we lastly think about the tertiary sector, which would include your tourism sector, will increase your retail sector. We think also that the recovery there will continue to depend on the lockdown as the restrictions are eased. But more importantly, as we think a bit 2-3 quarters ahead, if we are still going to have some form of social distancing remaining, it means that your retail sector, your tourism sector, is not going to recover fully if we still have a bit of your social distancing still remaining. So overall, across the industries, it's only the agriculture that we are slightly positive on. All the other sectors, I think, it's a slow, deep recession, but also a slow recovery. When we think about the demand side, which is the consumer side, for example, you and I, we think that, on the consumer side, the consumer will be spending quite less. We expect household consumption, which makes about 60% of GDP, to contract quite sharply this year, with the second quarter being the worst of the contraction. But also, even going forward, we think that the consumer will be spending less. There are a number of reasons for that. One is that the economy has been shedding jobs, and we know that a lot of companies have indicated that they are actually going to continue shedding jobs. Others are saying perhaps you take a pay cut and perhaps keep your job, which then means that your income is going to be under pressure. But also at the same time, income growth will also be under pressure. If you were used to getting a big salary increase 2-3 years ago, it's unlikely that you are going to get it going forward. And also similarly, which means then even your big bonus that you used to get, it's unlikely that going forward you're going to get that. So the consumer will be constrained from the revenue side. Yesterday we had the Bureau of Economic Research in Stellenbosch releasing the consumer confidence indicator for the second quarter, indicating that the consumers are quite downbeat in terms of consumer confidence, lowest in more than 30 years. If you break that data down, you look your high income earners, your middle income earners, even your low income earners, all of them are quite downbeat in terms of the view on the economy, the view on personal finances, and the view on whether they would go out and buy a durable goods, which is quite important. On buying a durable goods, we're talking about a motor vehicle, buying furniture. Those tend to be interest rate sensitive, that you tend to pay them off over a long time. In this uncertain environment where revenue or earnings are under pressure, we think that the consumer is going to remain quite cautious. We think that the consumer, in an environment where you're uncertain that this time next year, you'll still have that job. It's unlikely that they're going to go out and start buying a new car. Buying a new car is a 5-year commitment that we do not think that the consumer would want to do, i.e., perhaps look at a second-hand car, perhaps buy a car cash. So those are sort of a change in pattern that we are likely to see. Globally, what we have been seeing is that consumers have actually opted to actually save more, because this gives you sort of a shock of your life, and you say, look, there's so much uncertainty, actually I can spend less. And perhaps it's a pattern that we are going to see going forward, where we think that the consumer will be now spending more on necessity, less on luxury items, and especially staying away from those that are debt finance, like I said, your durable item, durable goods, such as your furniture, etc. So we are going to see that pattern going forward, I think, and our expectation is that demand for durable goods will be quite low. And in general, I think revenues have indicated we expect household disposable income to be under pressure, perhaps falling by closer to about 7%. So overall consumption will be down. And just to sum up, as I've indicated, the demand side and the supply side will be under pressure. For the year, we think GDP for the country or for the economy will contract by 9.7%. That's about 10% fall in GDP, the worst we've had in many, many, many years. But also going into 2021, we expect a slight uptick to about 3.1%. It's not really a recovery. It's more of a statistical bounce than a clear recovery. For the economy to return to perhaps even levels that we were at before the crisis, I think it will take us even more than 2 to 3 years before we even get to there. So to get to the level that we were at in 2019 in rand and cents terms, it's still going to take us some time. So it's a downbeat outlook where it's a contraction in GDP of more than 10%. Where the risks are based, we think that the risks are more tilted to the downside. When we look at perhaps the worst case scenario, if things do turn out quite worse, we think that perhaps GDP could be contract by even more than 12%, which then tells you that's sort of our worst case scenario. in this environment, where do we think interest rates are going? We know that to date, the Reserve Bank has been quite aggressive in cutting interest rates. Now we have interest rate cuts of about 275 basis points since the start of the year. And our sense is that perhaps there is scope for another cut of about 50 basis points from where we are. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is that we believe that the growth outlook might be a lot worse than what the Reserve Bank is forecasting. We know that our forecast for GDP, as I've indicated, is a minus 9.7. The Reserve Bank is a lot lower, less negative, and we think that perhaps the outlook is a lot weaker than what the Reserve Bank perhaps was forecasting. But more important is on the inflation side. In an environment where the economy is this weak, there's no inflation. When there's no inflation, it simply means then that it does provide scope for rate cuts. We are forecasting inflation to be below the mid-range of the inflation target range, to be at 3.1% this year, and a slight uptick in 2021 at about 3.8%. So generally indicating that there's just no inflation. If the midpoint of our inflation target range is 4.5, at 3.1, it tells us there's still perhaps some scope for the Reserve Bank to cut interest rate. And that is why we are saying that there is a 50 basis point cut as earliest as perhaps in later this month in July. But if things do actually deteriorate even further, as I've indicated that our worst case is pointing to a nearly 12% contraction in GDP, that is likely to perhaps even result in the Reserve Bank cutting interest rates even further beyond the 50 basis point that I've indicated. But the House view is a base case of 50 basis point cut, with perhaps risk tilted to more cuts, given the outlook that might deteriorate. So in general, it's not a positive story that I'm painting in terms of the growth. And the interest rate side, it's positive. But I think it's quite important, as my previous speakers have indicated, my colleagues on the panel, that this crisis, I think it's a lesson as well, that the importance of saving matters. If you look at, numbers that we look at, such as our household saving as a percent of disposable income, we are on the negative side. Household saving as a percent of GDP, we are also on the negative side, which then indicates that as a country, we are not saving enough. But perhaps this crisis gives us a reminder and opportunity to say, let's cut back on debt. With interest rates being this low and with further cuts being expected, perhaps it gives us an opportunity to say, let's focus on settling the debt and cutting back on the necessary expenditure. So overall, I think it's the gloomy outlook. The recovery is going to be quite painful. And as we think about the recovery, in conclusion, remember the recovery depends on a few things. One is on the health side, how we contain new infection, reduce the number of people that are dying from the pandemic. But lastly, it depends on the availability of a vaccine, all of which are quite difficult to predict. If the pandemic remains with us for much longer beyond 2020, then it means then obviously even the stimulus packages that governments have announced maybe might not be enough. We might need more. On the other side, as we think about the recovery, it also depends on the policy choices that we make, the decisions that we make around the stimulus, et cetera, and how we restructure the economy. So the economic outlook, the recovery, the pace, and also the magnitude or the shape of the recovery depends on many things that are quite difficult to predict at this stage. But it's quite a difficult and gloomy outlook where job losses are quite likely. And I think in a nutshell, it's quite a trying time, and it's likely to remain with us for perhaps more than 2 years before we see a full recovery. Gerald, over to you.
Thank you very much, Khoso. Now, you didn't tell us what we wanted to hear, but you told us some real truths in terms of where we're going. Basically, things are going to get worse before they get better. And there's some positives. Interest rates are going to remain low. Inflation is going to remain low, but saving is going to remain top of mind, and retrenchments are likely to follow. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've reached that time of the evening when we have to say goodbye for now. We have 5 webinars which are coming through, and we will get a lot of time to engage. I'd like to remind everyone watching that tomorrow 4 people are going to walk off 1,000 Rand richer, because the computer is going to choose them for having stayed on till the end. And if you want to find out if you've won, there'll be a Facebook live draw tomorrow. The Facebook link is @SASI Ways to Save. at SASI Ways to Save on Facebook. If you go to that website, you will be able to essentially see if you've managed to get yourself 1,000 Rand. Also, waystosave.co.za, waystosave.co.za. There's live feeds from Krista, Arabela, Maya, myself, Dr. Cindy. There will be a lot of information from the panelists, as well as other links to savers and information which is going to follow after this webinar series. The last thing I'm going to do now is to just announce there'll be another webinar coming through hosted by Mapalo Mako. And Mapalo holds a BCom degree in financial planning and a postgrad in financial planning. And she's got a website called Woman and Finance. And she's really going to tackle women's finances and perhaps also small business and private wealth in early August. Through her platform, Women and Finance, Mapalo has collaborated with most of South Africa's media platforms. And she truly believes in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, who says, educate a woman, you educate a nation. And this is why Woman and Finance was born. So Mapalo, her links and her information will be coming through on waystosave.co.za or at SASI Ways to Save, the Facebook link. And let's all catch up soon. On the 11th of July, Maya Fisher-French will be taking us through rebuilding our finances through COVID and beyond. 18th of July, I will be with Arabela, and we'll be talking ultimate savings hacks, the tools you can use to save and survive. On the 25th of July, we've got Krista van Heerden, and she'll be with Humphrey from Absa, and they'll be talking about know your money, grow your money, business and personal runways. And we'll also be having on the 1st of August, your financial health and wellness with Dr. Lesejo and Dr. Cindy. I'd like to close with a vote of thanks by just thanking everybody who's made this evening possible. I'd like to thank the Media 24 team, Faiza, and everybody with Drum, Francois, and You Magazine. Thank you for your support in making today a success. I'd like to thank the team behind Tamarin, Nomfundo, Pumla, Tami. They all know themselves. If I've forgotten you, it's not because I'm doing it on purpose. It's because time is with us that we have to end the evening. But I'd like to end with some comments which are currently on the feed. And people are saying, you know, Viva SASI, Viva Absa, Viva you, Drum, Viva. I think to me, it says something. The word Viva it was used a lot by comrades and people in liberation struggles as a battle cry. And when you say Viva, you're positive. And I think everybody who's on this forum is come through because they are positive about the future for South Africa and the future for what we can do as a nation. So the South African Savings Institute would really like to thank you all for participating. Please, please, please sign up for the remaining webinar series, and they will fill up and we will have more intimate conversations. All your questions have been recorded, and ABSA have kindly noted all the questions and said that financial planning professionals and advisors from ABSA will attend to each and every question. No one will be left out. We've got your email addresses. We know where to find you. And last but not least, we thank you, Prem, as well, for officially launching SASI Savings Month. And I'd also like to thank the SASI partners who are not here today, which is the IDC, as well as National Treasury. We thank them for continuing to support SASI and the work which SASI does. For our audience, thank you for putting up with us going a bit over time. And if you sign up for all the webinars, you saw the oranges ahead at the back. We'll have an orange party on the 8th of August at one of the webinars. Thank you, everyone. And I wish you all a good evening and thank you for joining us. Good night.